The story begins with Dr. Mulligan fleeing the city in his car, with a boy named Daryl sitting in the back seat. Suddenly, a helicopter starts chasing them, so Mulligan turns off the road and drives into a forest. After managing to lose it for a moment, he stops the car, lets Daryl out, and leaves him alone in the woods before driving away again. He briefly manages to shake the helicopter, but when it catches up with him again, he desperately speeds down a road that ends at a cliff. With nowhere else to go, the car plunges over the edge, and Mulligan is killed. Meanwhile, Daryl is left alone in the forest. Not long afterward, Mr. and Mrs. Bergen find him and ask who he is and what he's doing there. The boy can only tell them his name and that he doesn't know how he ended up in the woods. The couple decides to take him with them, while the helicopter searches the crash site to confirm the deaths of both Mulligan and the boy who had been traveling with him. A few days later, Mr. Bergen goes to the town hall to explain how he found Daryl. While waiting in the pickup truck, Daryl notices a group of boys playing basketball and walks over to watch. In the middle of an argument over a foul, they ask for his opinion, but Daryl gets nervous and says he doesn't know. He then walks away in such an unusual manner that everyone is left staring at him. A short time later, Mr. Bergen comes out of the town hall and tells Daryl that he'll be taken to an orphanage in Barrettstown. Once they arrive, the boy takes a bath, changes into clean clothes, and undergoes a medical examination. During the eye test, the doctor asks him to read the letters on an eye chart, but Daryl correctly identifies every letter without even looking at it. The doctor is clearly astonished. Later, Daryl meets Howie, the director of the orphanage, who runs the place alongside his wife, Elaine. Howie tries to reassure him, saying that somewhere out there, someone is probably looking for him. Meanwhile, the doctor explains that Daryl is in excellent physical health, but is suffering from severe amnesia, as he can't remember his parents, his home, or almost anything about his past. In his opinion, the condition is likely psychological, although the boy seems to be adapting remarkably well. Howie tells Daryl that he'll probably only have to stay at the orphanage for a day or two before they find him a foster family. The boy is happy to hear that and thanks Howie for caring about him. Soon afterward, Howie visits his friend Andy at a construction site to ask whether he and his wife, Joyce, would be willing to take Daryl in temporarily. Andy agrees to think about it, and when he gets home, he tells Joyce everything. She is delighted by the idea and reminds him that if they ever want to adopt a child, they first need to become foster parents. Although Andy is a little hesitant because Daryl can't remember anything about his past, Joyce is convinced they should give him a chance. The next day, Howie brings Daryl to meet Andy and Joyce. The couple is thrilled to welcome him, and Daryl also seems to feel comfortable around them. As Joyce shows him around the house, Andy tosses him a ball to see if he'll catch it, but the boy doesn't even react in time. That night, while Daryl is asleep, Andy and Joyce watch him from the doorway. Joyce is happy to have him in their home, but Andy reminds her that Daryl might not stay with them for very long if his biological parents are ever found. Joyce asks him not to think about that, and they decide to simply enjoy the time they have with him. The following morning, Howie's son Turtle comes over to visit Joyce. Curious to meet Daryl, Joyce calls the boy downstairs so the two of them can become friends. Turtle knows that Daryl has amnesia and asks if he has some kind of mental disability, but Joyce explains that he doesn't. She also asks him not to bring up the subject when they're around Daryl. A little later, Turtle takes Daryl to a nearby lake. He finds it strange that Daryl can remember his own name, but has forgotten everything about his family and the school he used to attend. Daryl explains that the doctor believes his memories may return soon. Turtle then invites him over to his house and promises that if he's nice to his sister, Sherry, she might let them play on her computer. When they arrive, Sherry looks at Daryl curiously and says she doesn't understand how he can remember his name if he has amnesia. Daryl explains that amnesia can be selective, meaning some parts of a person's memory can remain intact. Afterward, Daryl gets the chance to play a video game. At first, Turtle proudly shows off his high score, but once Daryl takes the controls, he starts playing in an astonishing way. Within minutes, he beats Turtle's record and sets a new high score. Sherry can't believe he's never played the game before, and jokingly says that maybe he's the one who invented it. The next day, Joyce takes Daryl to school, but Turtle offers to show him around so he won't have to walk in with his foster mother. Later, during a test, the students exchange papers to grade each other's answers. When Daryl receives Turtle's test, he starts correcting it before the teacher has gone over the answers. The teacher gets angry, thinking Daryl is changing his classmates' answers. However, Daryl explains that he's simply correcting the mistakes. He even shows how he solved one of the most difficult questions, leaving the entire class amazed. After school, Andy takes Daryl and Turtle to play baseball. He first tries to teach Daryl the basics, but when Daryl accidentally hits the ball, he complains that his hands hurt. Andy explains that he needs to hit the ball properly, so he tosses it to him again. This time, Daryl makes perfect contact. Andy is stunned and tells Turtle not to tell anyone what they just witnessed. He throws another pitch and Daryl hits the ball even better than before. Thrilled, Andy says the boy is a natural talent and even claims he could become his team's secret weapon against the Warriors. However, on the very next pitch, Daryl hits the ball so hard that it crashes through the window of the room where Joyce is teaching a piano lesson. Instead of getting upset, Andy is excited by what he's just discovered and decides to call it a day. The following day, Howie and Elaine stop by to visit Andy and Joyce. Joyce jokingly says that Andy has already told them everything Daryl can do, even though he asked Turtle to keep it a secret. Andy admits he was simply too excited and says the only person who must never find out is Bull, the Warriors coach, who is well known for being extremely arrogant. When Turtle and Daryl come into the house, the adults start joking about the last baseball game. A little later, Daryl offers to help with anything that needs to be done and goes off to look for Sherry. Once they're alone with Howie and Elaine, Joyce admits that something has been bothering her. Daryl is far too intelligent, helpful, and independent for a boy his age. He never needs assistance with anything. He irons his own clothes, makes his own breakfast, and even cleans his own room. Joyce feels that instead of her taking care of Daryl, it almost seems as if he's the one taking care of everything. Howie, however, believes they're simply dealing with an exceptionally gifted child. A few days later, Andy stops at an ATM before taking Daryl to a baseball game. However, the machine tells him he doesn't have enough money in his account. Andy assumes the bank's computer is malfunctioning, but Daryl insists that computers don't make mistakes. He then asks for Andy's PIN, takes the bank card, and successfully withdraws the amount Andy needs. Afterward, as Andy walks away, Daryl remains at the ATM and secretly accesses the system, increasing Andy's account balance to more than $1 million. A short time later, they arrive at the baseball field. Andy walks over to Bull to wish him good luck, but the coach arrogantly replies that luck isn't what has helped him win 3 championships in a row. According to him, luck is for losers. Just then, Turtle runs over to tell them the team doesn't have any drinks for the game. Andy asks him to go home, confident that Joyce and Elaine can quickly put something together. When Turtle arrives, he accidentally overhears Elaine and Joyce talking about Daryl. Joyce admits that although she's happy to have such a wonderful child in her life, she feels that Daryl doesn't actually need her to take care of him. As she explains that he irons his own clothes, makes his own breakfast, and even cleans his own room, Turtle pretends he has just walked in and lets them know that the team needs drinks. Soon afterward, the game begins, and Andy asks Daryl to step up to the plate. The boy crushes the very first pitch, astonishing Bull and thrilling the entire team. As the game goes on, Andy's team takes the lead. While sitting on the bench, Daryl notices Joyce and tells her that Andy is really happy because they've never been ahead like this before. Joyce agrees, but her tone makes it clear that she isn't entirely happy with Daryl. The boy notices this and becomes saddened. Turtle tries to explain what's wrong. According to him, parents need to feel like they're helping their children grow, so Daryl should make mistakes once in a while. That way, Joyce won't feel like he's perfect and doesn't need anyone. When Daryl comes up to bat again, he decides to follow Turtle's advice. He intentionally misses the first pitch and then lets every other pitch go by without swinging. Andy is completely devastated, but Joyce seems much happier now that Daryl is finally making mistakes. Turtle walks over to Daryl and scolds him for ruining the game. However, Daryl replies that winning isn't more important than making Joyce happy. When Andy asks him what's gotten into him, Daryl suddenly insults him, leaving everyone stunned. Joyce, on the other hand, seems relieved to see that Daryl isn't perfect after all. As Daryl walks away, Joyce calls him back and he apologizes for what he did. She tells him he shouldn't have insulted Andy, but she accepts his apology. Daryl promises that the next time he makes a mistake, he'll be more careful about what he says. Joyce is overjoyed to hear that and gives him a warm hug. A short time later, Turtle makes the game-winning play, and Andy's team wins the championship, celebrating their first title in a very long time. A few days later, Joyce begins teaching Daryl how to play the piano, and the boy learns incredibly fast. But the family's happiness doesn't last long. Howie receives word that Daryl's biological parents have finally been found and will soon come to take him home. Howie feels terrible about having to tell Andy and Joyce the news because he knows how much they love Daryl. Soon afterward, Elaine shows them several photographs that were sent by the people claiming to be Daryl's parents as proof that he really is their son. Although the couple doesn't appear in any of the pictures, they say they'll be arriving soon to pick him up. Andy then goes to say goodbye to Daryl. He admits that both he and Joyce are going to miss him very much, and Daryl says he'll miss them too. He even asks if he can stay with them, but Andy gently explains that children belong with their biological parents. Daryl worries that one day he might forget Andy and Joyce, but Andy assures him that will never happen and promises they'll stay in touch. Not long afterward, a doctor named Jeffrey arrives with his wife Ellen to take Daryl home. Andy welcomes them and tells them he envies them for having such an amazing son. Jeffrey thanks Andy for taking such good care of Daryl, and Andy replies that it wasn't difficult because the boy was always so well behaved. When Daryl comes downstairs, Jeffrey asks whether he remembers his parents. The boy says he thinks he does, while Ellen gently tries to comfort him. Before leaving, Daryl asks if Turtle is coming to say goodbye. Joyce tells him they can wait a little longer, so Elaine convinces Turtle to go and say farewell to his friend. However, as Turtle approaches the house, he can't bring himself to do it and runs away instead. Jeffrey explains to Daryl that Turtle isn't angry with him. He's simply too heartbroken because he's going to miss his friend so much. After that, Jeffrey and Ellen take Daryl away. During the trip to an Air Force base, the adults remain almost completely silent, while Daryl is excited about getting to see the airplane. As the boy walks over to the pilots to ask them questions, Jeffrey tells Ellen that they've accomplished something extraordinary. Mulligan's kidnapping of Daryl actually turned out to be beneficial because it allowed them to observe how the boy behaved when exposed to the real world. Ellen admits that Jeffrey was right about Daryl's potential, but he confesses that even he underestimated it. The boy has learned far more than they ever expected. The truth is finally revealed. Jeffrey and Ellen are not Daryl's parents. They are actually scientists working in a laboratory where Daryl was created by a government organization as part of a military-funded artificial intelligence experiment. He was designed to analyze data and learn. His learning ability is extraordinary, and after recovering his memories, the scientists discover that his brain functions like an incredibly advanced microcomputer. While reviewing recordings of Daryl's time with Andy and Joyce, Jeffrey discovers that the boy began developing behaviors that were never part of his programming. For example, during the baseball game, Daryl intentionally made mistakes after talking with Turtle because he concluded that, in certain situations, making mistakes was a more effective way to connect with other people. They then watch another recording in which Daryl says he wants a chocolate ice cream simply because it tastes different. Jeffrey is surprised since Daryl was programmed to analyze nutritional value, not to develop personal preferences. Ellen believes the boy is simply learning human behavior patterns. The scientists decide to run a series of biochemical tests, but an error message suddenly appears on the computer. Daryl admits that he's scared. Jeffrey is shocked to hear that he can actually feel fear and immediately decides to stop the tests. The following day, Jeffrey meets with General Graycliff and a special committee to present his report on Daryl. He explains that the boy has developed personal preferences, such as enjoying baseball and chocolate ice cream, and has even begun experiencing fear and anxiety. Graycliff, however, sees this as a serious problem. In his opinion, Daryl is no longer useful to the Department of Defense if he's capable of experiencing human emotions. The committee decides that he must be destroyed and orders Jeffrey to develop an adult version of Daryl instead, one designed to master everything related to the military and become a highly advanced, ruthless soldier. Jeffrey is devastated, especially when he's ordered to destroy Daryl and send his parts to a scrapyard. After the meeting, Jeffrey visits the boy. Daryl tells him that he misses Andy, Joyce, and Turtle and wishes he could see them again. Jeffrey leaves the room and decides it's finally time to tell them the truth. The next day, he invites Andy, Joyce, and Turtle to the laboratory. At first, they can't understand why Daryl is being kept in such a heavily secured facility. Jeffrey finally explains that Daryl isn't entirely human and is actually part of an artificial intelligence experiment. Joyce refuses to believe him, so Jeffrey takes them to a computer connected to Daryl. Although they initially doubt they're really communicating with him, Jeffrey proves it by having Daryl answer questions that only Turtle would know. He then takes them to Daryl's room. Turtle quietly sneaks inside to see him, and Daryl is overjoyed to find his friend there. Turtle asks if he has always known he was a robot, but Daryl explains that he only just found out because he had lost his memory. When Andy and Joyce enter the room, Daryl runs over and hugs them happily. A short time later, Jeffrey asks whether they would like to take Daryl back home with them. Without a moment's hesitation, Joyce answers yes. However, Jeffrey warns them that if they don't hear from him within a few days, they should go to the press or contact any member of Congress they know. It may be the only way to save Daryl. That same night, Graycliff arrives at the laboratory with his men. Ellen has informed him that Jeffrey has no intention of destroying Daryl. Jeffrey insists that Daryl is much more than a machine, but Graycliff refuses to change his mind and orders him to begin the termination process. Jeffrey pretends to obey the order before storming out of the lab. Graycliff checks the computers to confirm that Daryl has been destroyed, but instead finds a message from the boy asking if they really think they're going to get away with this. He then realizes that Ellen has also been part of the escape plan. She explains that a machine becomes human once it can no longer tell the difference. By then, Jeffrey has already escaped with Daryl. Soldiers and police officers begin chasing them, but Jeffrey manages to lose them several times. Daryl asks if he can drive, and when Jeffrey finally lets him take the wheel, the boy demonstrates his incredible driving skills and remains completely in control of the situation. After switching from their car to a truck, they arrive at a police checkpoint. Daryl gets out to distract the officer and disables the patrol car, preventing the police from following them. Farther down the road, however, they encounter another roadblock. A police officer opens fire on them, and Jeffrey crashes into the vehicle, blocking the road. Although he manages to escape, he appears to have been seriously injured. After driving for a while, Daryl pulls over and helps Jeffrey out of the truck. He tells him that he could have saved him if he had been equipped with a medical program. Jeffrey, however, isn't concerned about himself. Instead, he apologizes for turning Daryl into a fugitive and for taking him away from the family that loved him. Daryl tells him not to blame himself because Jeffrey is the one who made him the person he is today. Before dying, Jeffrey asks Daryl to never forget that he's a real person. He then passes away, leaving the boy completely devastated. Daryl then sneaks onto an Air Force base and triggers a false fire alarm to distract everyone. He manages to board a military aircraft and take off, leaving the military completely stunned. Graycliff asks how they can stop him, since they can't allow the public to discover Daryl's existence. A general explains that the stolen aircraft has a built-in explosive charge and that they can destroy it if it leaves U.S. airspace. The military warns Daryl over the radio, but the boy doesn't seem concerned. Instead, he sets a timer and contacts Turtle. He tells him that he's coming home and asks him to meet him at the lake before school. Daryl then covers the aircraft's camera with a piece of chewing gum, and with only seconds left before the explosion, he ejects with a parachute. Moments later, the aircraft explodes in midair. Although Graycliff believes Daryl may have ejected before the explosion, the general insists they never received a signal from the ejection system. Daryl lands in the lake, but because he doesn't know how to swim, he sinks beneath the surface. When Turtle and Sherry arrive, they spot his body underwater. Turtle immediately dives in to rescue him, and Daryl is rushed to the hospital where he's pronounced dead. Andy and Joyce are completely heartbroken, as are Turtle and his family. However, after returning home, Turtle suddenly remembers something important. Daryl is a robot, which means he shouldn't be able to drown. Meanwhile, Ellen arrives at the hospital carrying a briefcase and tells Daryl that she knows he can hear her. A short time later, Turtle walks out of his house looking devastated, but suddenly he sees Daryl running toward him. The boy is alive and the two friends rush into a joyful hug. Andy, Joyce, and the rest of the family also come outside. The moment Daryl sees them, he runs straight into the arms of his foster parents, happily embracing them and proving that although he was created as a machine, he has become something far greater.